Welcome to American Christian or Christian American. I'm Sean Legacy and I'm your host. If you have never watched this before, I would encourage you to go back to at least the first episode, but also the first few episodes that would help you get some context. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, please push that subscribe button and join the family. And those who are interested in understanding truth and possibly expanding their knowledge of different things. If you like this video, please press the like button. So I've got a video that we're going to go through in a few seconds here, but I want to put out some ideas there for you to think about. All of us, to a point, are subject to our education or indoctrination, meaning that what we're exposed to as young people comes from our family, it comes from friends around us, it comes from church if you go to church, it comes from history books. What we're exposed to become part of our reality. And we learn that 1 plus 1 equals 2. 2 plus 3 equals 6, right? Oh, no, 2 plus 3 equals 5. Anything outside of these simple norms that we have is wrong. At least that's what our mind tells us. Now, we can learn beyond those indoctrinations or education, depending on how they're put across us. But it takes an effort. It takes a conscious effort because we will mentally go with what we have become accustomed to. For instance, I have a particular exit that I take getting off the freeway when I come home from work. Well, sometimes I want to go someplace else and stop before I go home from work, and it would require me to go to the next exit. And if I'm not really consciously thinking about it, I will just take the exit I'm normally accustomed to doing. And then I have to go out of my way. I could have stayed on the freeway and I could have gotten quicker to where I was going. But my mind takes over according to what I have been programmed to do. Well, that's a simple analogy for something that is much more complex. It is complex in our daily life, how we perceive people, how we perceive ourselves, how we perceive the environment around us, both nature and also politically, and how cities function, what we think of them, whether we have fear or we don't have fear, how we look at the United States as a democracy or a republic. This is something that we need to think about because we've been told many, many times, and this is where I prefer the word indoctrinated. We've been indoctrinated over several things. One, we've indoctrinated to be racist, even to the slightest degree, because we've been told that certain people invented certain things when in fact they didn't. There are so many instances where a white person is used to be the face of an invention when it actually was an African American who did most of, if not part of, or if not all of the invention. But the white person got credit for it because a racist society says white people are superior and others are inferior, especially African Americans. But we also have this idea that America is the greatest country in the world. It is the best and strongest democracy in the world. Well, that simply isn't true. And we're going to talk about some different things today. So I'm going to play this video for you, and then we're going to go through and talk about the things that were talked about.
It's kind of sadly fitting that in the wake of what happened on Saturday night at the Washington Hilton and the subsequent calls that a bunker is now absolutely necessary for the president under the White House, that the British King, Charles III, has arrived in Washington to mark the 250 years since America declared independence from Great Britain. So the Wall Street Journal is calling the visit a charm offensive, an effort to salvage Britain's badly fraying relationship with the United States. But I think of it instead as a kind of wellness check, a check-in to see how the United States is doing on its own. So let's see how the great-great-great-great-grandson of America's last king might find the old place. Hey folks, I'm Tad Sturmer. I'm a public historian and a scholar of American history at the University of Southern Denmark and Johns Hopkins, and I'm the author of A Resistance History of the United States. Charles III is in Washington right now, and this is a peculiar moment for the republic that broke from his ancestors' empire. The visual alone is a dark joke, right? You have a 77-year-old hereditary monarch neutered by centuries of constitutional duct tape, shaking hands with a 79-year-old president who has shown just how much of the American system depends on electing people who just choose not to burn the whole place down. The last part matters because the United States was not, as we all know, founded as a democracy. It was founded as a republic by men who feared democracy more than they feared monarchy. Daniel Shays scared them more than George III ever did. So by the summer of 1787, the men in the Philadelphia Convention watched in terror as farmers in Massachusetts followed the example of the resistance patriots to take up arms to alter or abolish their own state government, which had become as abusive as the British government had seemed 10 years before. That was the context for the Constitution they wrote and the arguments they used to support it. The document's mostly designed to keep the people away from power. An electoral college so that people would not directly choose the president, a Senate appointed by state legislatures so that people would not directly choose senators, a federal judiciary appointed for life and answerable to no one, a high bar for amending the Constitution, a higher one for removing the president. So they built this sprawling machine of fear, hoping ambition would check ambition, property would check people, the people and institutions would defend their own power, and virtue would rule over it all. So the guardrails against a restless democratic public were structural, durable, and explicit. The guardrails against an executive who decided who was the state were vague, polite, and resting on the assumption that no such unvirtuous, ambitious person would ever be elected. More than 200 years later, the structural guardrails against the people are mostly intact. The polite ones against the executive are absolutely not. The presidency was always the especially weak point in the no king story of that founding. The Federalists rejected monarchy in their pamphlets, and their Constitution went ahead and created something much like one anyway. They vested executive power in a single person, made that person head of state, head of the government, commander-in-chief, gave him the veto, the pardon, the appointment power, the authority to negotiate treaties, and command an army that he could deploy against the people. The Anti-Federalists noticed all of that. They argued that the proposed American president would hold powers exceeding those of the actual British king, who by then had been operating inside a parliamentary system for a century and could not raise an army or spend money without Parliament say so first. The Federalists waved the objections away. But 2.5 centuries of war, empire, emergency, and nationalist myth-making doing its work proved that the Anti-Federalists were absolutely right. Arthur Schlesinger called the result the imperial presidency in 1973. And the 50 years since then have been a story of how the office has continued to grow under presidents of both parties. And now, of course, all of that's exploding under Trump into something older and uglier than 1776. Personal rule. Not Charles III, Charles I. So that's what makes the royal visit useful for thinking about. Charles III is not arriving as the monster the myth makers want you to believe America escaped in 1776. He's arriving as an executive whose authorities have been stripped away, ritualized into ceremony, fenced into celebrity, and only of real political consequence when and if Parliament says there. He can't raise revenue, can't declare war, can't pass a law or block one. He can't pardon, can't appoint, can't fire on his own. He gives a speech once a year that someone else writes, opens Parliament, signs what he's given to sign, smiles at the cameras, meets with the Prime Minister once a week, and then just otherwise stays out of the way. He's an impotent king, which is to say he's exactly the kind of head of state the men who wrote the Constitution swore they would never tolerate, and the men who opposed the Constitution said was the only real guarantee of the rights of the people. And here's a part of the American story that the nationalist historiography has spent 2.5 centuries refusing to allow you to look at directly. The countries that came out of the same American Revolution, the same revolutionary period, and did not throw the king overboard, turned over the same 2.5 centuries into some of the most stable democracies in the world. Britain itself kept expanding voting rights and reforming the powers of government. Canada was transformed by the tens of thousands of loyalists who refused the new republic and went north with their own ideas about representative government. And then they began dismantling slavery as early as 1793 and became the bulwark of freedom that enslaved Americans ran toward. New Zealand gave women the right to vote 27 years before the United States did. All of them, including Australia, evolved over the same 2.5 centuries into strong democracies. Power sits where the founders of the American Republic refused to let it sit, with the people, exercised through parliaments and cabinet governments that answer to them, can be recalled by them, and can be removed by them. A vote of no confidence can bring a whole government down on a Tuesday afternoon, and an election can remake it. The system has produced stability and freedom together, and the steady expansion of rights that follows from them, including the kind of universal health care that Americans are still debating whether to call a right at all. Now, none of them have innocent histories. None of us get out of that. They are settler colonialist societies built on stolen indigenous land, and they carry the violence of their founding the way every settler society does. And they bear the modern responsibility for fixing that, repairing that, as settler societies must do. But the political systems they built on top of that violence have proven more democratic, more responsive, and more durable than the ones the American founders designed. They kept the crown and built democracies underneath it. The country that threw the crown overboard built a republic, and the republic has been struggling since 1865 to become a democracy, and now by any honest measure is struggling just to remain a republic. So just what, Charles III might ask, was that American experiment thing again? Because if the hypothesis was that a self-governing people could do without a hereditary monarch and govern themselves through a constitution of their own design, then the control group is sitting in London and Ottawa and Canberra and Wellington, and the control group is doing better. That's the suppressed footnote of 1776. The real story, maybe the real spirit, the story of the Loyalists. And it's not a counterfactual. It's a real alternate reality, an actual what if, which then actually happened somewhere else, just a border and some oceans away. In October 1779, and this one I love, a Virginia Loyalist named John Ranulph, then in exile in London, wrote to his cousin and old friend Thomas Jefferson and asked him a question we might all reflect on. Would it not be prudent to rescind your Declaration of Independence and be happily reunited to your ancient and natural friend and enjoy a peace which I most religiously think would pass all understanding? Your laws and regulations will be established on the solid basis of the British Constitution, and your happiness will be attended to with all the solicitude which belongs to an affectionate parent. Reflect, I beseech you, on what I have said. Now, pretty absurd to say that in 1779, but not quite so absurd for us to use today. What the 250th anniversary should be doing is the thing Jefferson never had the chance to do, because the lever never reached him. But we can reflect on what Randolph said, against the backdrop of a hollowed-out Congress and an executive that keeps learning how little will stop him, against the democracies that emerged from the empire America left, against the fact that Britain, compromised and brutal as its abolition was, passed emancipation and brought it into effect across most of its empire a full generation before the United States. Yes, Britain bought off the enslavers. Yes, emancipation came with coercive apprenticeship and imperial hypocrisy. But what Britain purchased was an end to slavery without paying the price of the catastrophe the United States required: civil war, destruction, and more than 700,000 dead, and still an incomplete settlement. And against the simple, embarrassing, observable fact that the countries that remained within the British constitutional world have, over the same 2.5 centuries, often been better at the thing the American nationalist historians insist the founders invented. So Charles III arrives as a kind of wellness check, not for Britain, for us. He stands in the photographs as a historical prop, a reminder of the path not taken and the danger we've refused to name. Britain kept the crown and contained it. America rejected the crown and built an executive that kept swelling to fit one. We fled a king and built an imperial president. They kept a king and built democracies. Reflect on that. And that's all I got today, folks. Alan Z.
So here we have an historian who is tied to the University of Denmark and is a historian of the United States. And he talks about the idea of a British monarch coming to speak at Congress in the 250-year celebration of America, which is ironic because they broke away from Britain at the time. But he points out many things. So one thing, let's look at the British monarch today. The monarchy today has no political power. It can't make laws. It can't declare war. It can't decide how much money is going to be spent. No real power at all. They meet with the prime minister. They have the talks to the king or queen. is entitled to be informed, and they can advise the Prime Minister in private, but the Prime Minister doesn't have to take anything they say. They simply can advise according to what they have experienced in their time on the throne. Now, even back when the United States broke away from the British monarchy, they didn't have complete power. They still were subject to parliamentary control. Now, they had more power, yes, but they didn't have all the power. We're not talking about a time when the British monarchy had most of the power or huge influence over things, to where if you were born as the first child, or usually the first male child at that time, you would carry on the rule of a government. And none of us, of course, would say that it is a good qualification just because your father was the leader, that you should become leader, because you might be different. You might have some other qualifications, but would you be a good leader just because your father was? Or maybe your father wasn't. Maybe you would be better. It was hit or miss, but here you are stuck with this person for as long as they live. So we broke away from them and we formed a democracy, right? No, we didn't. We formed a republic. We formed a republic. Why? Because the people of the time, the founding fathers, were afraid of a democracy. Why? They didn't want the power to be in the hands of the people. They wanted to make sure that only a certain people had the power to maintain a system that kept power in the affluent and the elite, the same thing. They had the wealth and everything else. They created white supremacy. Why? In order to keep themselves in power, because they divided up poor whites who have been treated badly from slaves. And so if they thought they were better than slaves, even though they were poor, they had control over them. Everything they did to establish this country was to indoctrinate us to believe that we are free, that we have the greatest country in the world. Why? If we have the greatest country in the world, we won't suggest that it's got major problems. We won't even look towards other countries as a good example, because if we're the greatest country in the world, why would I want to look at them? But the fact is, we are very flawed. And we are stuck in a system of racial oppression and in the idea that there are multiple races, because there is only one race, the human race. That's it. There's only one race, the human race. So, what do we have? We don't have a king, right? Well, we don't have a person called a king, a monarch, or a sovereign. But we have a presidency who we've endowed with more powers than even the king of the time. And that presidency's power has grown over the years. And right now we're seeing a huge power grab from Trump. So are we still a democracy, or what a republic and what the world would classify us as a flawed democracy or a deficient democracy? Or are we an autocracy, which is like communism? Well, we're not at the communist level yet, but we are leaning more towards a moderate autocracy. So people are rebelling. And people want us to go back the way things were. African Americans don't want things to go back the way they were. Neither do I. Why? Well, you see, we have never had what we should have. We have never had a system of justice that treats people right. This system does everything it can to keep people under control. So what happened in the 1960s, people were rising up for certain rights, and it was bloody. People were murdered, tortured, so many lynchings that went on. But yet there was some victory to get some of the rights we had. So these people, did they disappear? No. They went a little more underground. They may not say things as openly, but they worked from the underground and they reemerged under Trump. Trump is not, say, the Pied Piper or the one who leads everything. He's actually being used, in a sense, as a puppet to a point, but yet he's doing things like an autocracy. So what's happening is a reinsurgence of what's always been there. So we don't need to return to quiet times. We need to move beyond Trump and to actually start forming a better country and a better, an actual democracy. But before we can do that, we have to be honest with ourselves and overcome indoctrinated ideas. Now, part of the problem is that too many of us don't want to make an effort in life except just doing the simplest things. We expect everything to be there for us, but we don't want to take an effort for it. We complain about it, but we do nothing about it. And actually, those people who do that actually keep the system afloat. Because there are more of those types of people than there are the people who actually are causing the major problems. We need more people to resist it, to realize this country could be better. I believe with a new constitution, but even with the constitution we got, we can push it better. But I really believe ultimately, if we want to form a real special country, yeah, we need a new constitution. But we have to re-teach people and break down all this indoctrination that has gone through the years. Think about it. We have a presidency with imperialistic ideas, meaning powerful ideas, and we didn't want a king. The president is still in there. You can't get rid of the president very easily. They've made it very difficult to do that. Under a parliamentary system, you can change governments if you need to. If they're not functioning, depending on the rules of that particular democracy, you can get rid of that democracy. Let's look at something else. I've got a chart here. Democracymatrix.com. So, a complete ranking of the total value in 2020, and it's gotten, I think, worse since then. The first country on the list with a working democracy is Denmark. The second country is Norway, and they rank, by the way, they rank 0.958, 0.956. Then Finland, Sweden, Germany, Switzerland, Netherlands, New Zealand, 9. And you say, wait, where's the United States? We'll get there eventually. The Netherlands, and they rank 0.93. New Zealand, Belgium, Costa Rica, 0.91. Spain, 0.912. Luxembourg, Australia, Estonia, Iceland, Ireland at 0.89. United Kingdom at 0.89. Austria, France, South Korea at 0.88. And to be clear, some of these may have a constitutional monarch, which is basically one that doesn't have power, but they represent the head of state. A place like Iceland has a president, but the president is like a constitutional monarch. They represent the state, they're head of state, but their political power rests in the parliament. United Kingdom, Austria, France, South Korea, Lithuania, Italy is 22 and 0.87. Portugal is 0.86. Canada is 0.86. Japan is 0.85. Taiwan is 0.84. And these are all working democracies, okay? Some are better than others, like I said, the list. Cyprus, 0.84. Chile, 0.84. Slovakia, 0.83. Greece, 0.83. 32, the Czech Republic, 0.83. I don't pronounce this one right. Latvia. I'm just going to spell it because I'm going to butcher it. 0.83. Barbados, 0.83. Israel, 0.82. Oh, number 36, we get to the United States. 0.81, but it's not classified as a working democracy. It's classified as a deficient democracy. And these deficient democracies go all the way down to 81. And then at 82, they have a hybrid regime. And then a few deficiency democracies. And then they go to moderate autocracy, which Russia's in there. And then you have hard autocracies, where it's total totalitarian control. But the United States, which is supposed to be the best country in the world with the best democracy in the entire world, we're better than everybody else, ranks 36 on the list. We have a long ways to go. We got to stop bragging about ourselves and start looking at ourselves if we want to improve things. We can't improve the racist situation in this country, but see, there's some people who don't want to. I'm not talking about just the people in power, but a lot of Caucasian people want it in the hard line. They want to have a Christian nationalist regime, which dictates everything because they've been pre-programmed to do so. Just like some people are hardcore like maintaining a monarchy with all the power. Those people misrepresent religion, they misrepresent everything, they believe that they're superior to everybody else, and quite frankly, genetically, people who look like me we have less diversity within our systems. We've lost genetic material. And if you look at things in a non-biblical way, we say that we are a genetic mutation. We're not the originals. The originals are dark African people. Jesus was a dark-skinned man. The current Jews do not represent what the Jews looked like back in those times. They might have been lighter and darker, but they were descendants of Shem, but also they were part of the Israelites, which were separated, who went to Egypt and continued to mix with some of the darker skinned people. So even if other Shem clans lightened up more, they wouldn't have lightened up as much as Japheth. Japheth is where the Europeans come from, people who look like me. But even back then, they weren't dark. Even the earliest Europeans were looked at to be darker skinned people. Some of them started having lighter eyes. So it changed as the time went on, but we were not the originals. We were like several photocopies later. There is several errors in our DNA, so to speak. So we have to get off our high horse. Now, God, I believe in God, and I believe in Christianity, but I don't believe in the Christianity that America represents. America represents a very distorted version of Christianity. But the Christianity of God in the Bible and what historically took place, God loves all of us, even if we were not the original people. Why is it important then? Because it's been lied about and is still being used to degrade and dehumanize other people. If we started telling the truth, we can learn to value each other for who we are, human beings that all have intrinsic value. So, when you take a march out because of No Kings Act, that's fine. When you out saying that you want to turn things back, I would say, let's turn things forward. Let's go beyond the idea of a king, and let's go beyond the idea of a president who has all this power. In the first place, you can modify the Constitution that we have now, one, by getting rid of the Electoral College. Now, that'd be more difficult to do so without a constitutional amendment. One of the things is that there's a pact out there of states that are deciding that they will give their electoral votes to the candidate that wins the popular vote, regardless of what the ratio is in the state. So let's say, we'll turn it around. Let's say the state went more Republican, or let's go the other way around. Let's say the state won more Democrats, but the Republican won the popular vote. Well, even though that state went more Democrat, they would give their electoral votes to that candidate because it should go by the popular vote across the entire country. Now, that pact does not go into effect until enough states join that would equal 270 electoral votes that would That's what you need for the Electoral College to declare the presidency. Now, I ultimately believe that we need a new constitution. I argue a new government, a parliamentary system. But even if we don't go that way, how can we change it? We can change it by having a president with some less power to do so, having a president elected by the popular vote, having senators elected, but have them split up. One half goes to the other, one side of the state, one goes to the other side of the state. Or you divide it by population, however you want to do it, but they aren't elected by the same people. And a Supreme Court that has term limits of 15 years or so to be the max in the Supreme Court, and a possibility of removing a Supreme Court member if they're acting outside of defined parameters to which they should be doing. But that's where another constitution will come in as well. We need a constitution that's more defined, setting rights and principles much more clear, leaving out some of the ambiguity that's in the Constitution, and it would actually clarify things, how they should be. But whatever we do, one of the most important things that we have to do is to learn to be honest about who we are and where we've come from, and set a direction to be better. Let's stop acting like we're better than everybody else and try to catch up to them. Try to be better than them. Many of them who freed slaves long before us. The Canadians freed the slaves in the 1700s. We didn't do it till the 1800s. Many people fled from here. And yet there's still racism across the white world. Other countries have come so much farther than we have. We are still a mess. And yet we keep lying about it, and we keep hurting people. And why don't white people know about this? Well, because they're comfortable in their world, and they don't have to look. And so many of them continue to believe the lies that their parents put down and their grandparents put down. Well, you may have family members that teach that stuff. You don't have to follow it. That doesn't mean you have to stop loving them either. I've had relatives in my family who were racist, and I respected them as my a grandparent or whatever else, but I did not agree with them, and I lived my life according to what I needed to live. That doesn't mean that I'm going to treat them badly or argue with them about it, because if there's no chance of winning an argument with them, why bother waste the energy? Just love them, care for them, do your best for them, and go off and do what's right. You don't have to continue to do those things and justify those types of things. You can decide to do better with your life and be a better person. That's up to you. It really is. And I ask you now, what will you do? Will you continue to believe the lies of history and the indoctrination of the future? And if you have small children, will you continue to allow this society to pollute their minds with ideas that are just lies being carried forward? Will you continue to teach your children that they're better than everybody else? Or will you teach them that they're part of a human family where we're all valued? Now, you may have beliefs in Christianity, I do as well, where God teaches how we'll be saved from our sins. That's fine, but you still don't have to hate people who don't respond to that. Leave that with God and still treat them with respect. Believe, if you study the Bible, there are things we're supposed to follow and believe. But we don't have to disrespect people in the process. Be like Jesus, who cared for people. And yes, Jesus did get mad at injustices. Remember, Jesus didn't sin, though. We get mad and we usually sin. Jesus did stand up against the corruption. Why aren't you? Why are you believing somebody who just lies about history? That's the question. Until the next time on American Christian or Christian American.